Welcome in. We are talking a review for Joker, the 2019 film directed by Todd Phillips, written by Todd Phillips and Scott Silver, and starring, of course, Joaquin Phoenix. Now, this is going to be a spoiler-filled review/discussion because I don't necessarily have the patience to make a separate video to not talk about spoilers. But the way we're going to do things with our reviews is we'll have a best scene, a worst scene, and the Oscar goes to, which is for the best performance in the film. Then we're going to get into some discussion of the film, breaking things down a little bit, talking about literary themes and such. And then we're going to have a rating and a recommendation based on the film itself. So the best scene and the worst scene in this movie are inextricably linked because they are both multiple and they are the same scenes. The best scenes in this movie are those scenes with Zazie Beetz. The worst scenes in this movie are those scenes with Zazie Beetz. And I'm going to expand on that a little bit more coming up. It is in one of my talking points for the discussion part of this review. And before we get there, the Oscar goes to, for Joker, the 2019 film, is, of course, Joaquin Phoenix. This is a performance that, while I think it was drastically overblown by certain sects of the audience, it was necessary, I think, for this film to feel as complete as it does, which is sort of a problem with this film that I think we're going to touch on a little bit later as well. But the first thing that I want to talk about in the discussion portion of this, I don't care about politics. I don't care about the politics to the discussion around this film one way or another. I'm not here for those. I'm here for the film known as Joker. I'm viewing this movie as this movie. I am not viewing this movie as a political statement, though political statements may be made within literary examples, such as this. I don't care about the surrounding elements. I am taking this text, the text of this film, as the text of this film. Through and through, start to finish, that's it, straight up, flat out. This movie is this movie for the sake of this movie and all those things therein. Now, that said, I have to initially address something slightly extracurricular to the film, but necessary to the experience of the movie. That is the trailers. The trailers for Joker left me very, very worried. I was terrified because of the trailers that this movie was going to be pretentious, and it was. But those trailers made this movie out to look so pretentious that it was going to be painful to sit through. And it was painful to sit through, but not for the fact of being pretentious. And the reason it was painful to sit through, we will get to in a moment as well. This movie was not particularly pretentious. It was pretentious, and movies' artistic statements are allowed to be so. It is acceptable for them to be a bit pretentious. And it was not especially so. But it was melodramatic. It was very melodramatic. And part of the reason that it was melodramatic is because of the only real metaphor that I can give for this movie. Is that this movie is half-baked in the center and burnt around the edges. There are tons. There are a bunch of what would be really nice little elements to a movie. Really nice little touches that are blown way out of proportion. And there are a number of things which are little itty-bitty details in this movie that are periphery seeming distractions to this movie that are in fact things which should be fully expounded upon and are not, which gives the sense of melodrama because your audience is being begged, is being implored to care about something because they're being told to care about it. In fact, the very character of Joker is one of those things. We are shown early and we are shown often that we are to care about this man because sad things happen to him, bad things happen to him, and he seems to have no recourse. He seems to have no direction. He seems to have no future. And in the classic hero's arc, we see him create a future different for himself from the past that he was victim to. That's classic. He is the protagonist of this film, though he is an antagonistic individual. And because... So let's get a little bit into those things which are half-baked versus those things which are burnt to a crisp. One of those little things which would have been a nice touch in a movie that talks so very, very much about class warfare is the fact that the Joker's mother was named Penny. Nearly worthless. Penny. 1/100th of a standard unit of measurement in American currency. Penny. That was a nice touch when it was just her signature on a letter to Thomas Wayne. It was a nice touch then. But we had to then repeat her name as Penny. And I believe, perhaps I am mistaken, but I believe it is only after her name appears in print that we hear it audibly. It is only after we have to spy her signature on that letter. Or perhaps it was the envelope. I can't remember particularly right now. But it is only after we are forced to make the observation that the name is given to us in the dialogue, which is, dare I say, a sign that the writing progressed in that manner. That the writer was sitting around and wrote the Joker's mother's name into the script first as the signature on the letter / the front of the envelope. That was the beginning of it. And it was never drafted in earlier to the script. Which would be messy. Not a sin that breaks a movie. Not a sin that breaks any writing project, but it would be something that would be messy. Neil Gaiman says that the revision is to make it look like you knew what you're doing. You knew what you were doing all along. I repeat, revision, according to Neil Gaiman, is to make it look like you knew what you were doing all along. So when, in the thralls of writing this thing, you realize, hey, we're going to name her Penny because this thing's about class warfare. Great. Fantastic. Either leave it understated on the letter, or you have to go back and revise it earlier into the script. One or the other. Either way, that ends up being burnt to a crisp when it could have just been a nice little touch. Zazie Beetz relationship. The Zazie Beetz relationship is another one of those things where you've just got to trust your audience. We got there. We understood that this was just another mad fantasy from this character, from Arthur Fleck. We understood that. We were able to put it together. We were able to piece it together. We didn't need the scene where he goes... It's not even him that goes back and sees these things. It's just the audience that goes back and realizes that she's not there. It's really just for the audience's good. we didn't need it. We knew that. And anyone who hadn't gotten there to that point, through the film, is someone who will benefit later from a second viewing. Anyone who didn't happen to put those things together at that time didn't need their mind blown by that little scene. It was unnecessary. It was stupid. It degraded the film and spoke down to the audience. It's possible that there were plenty of intelligent people that had not quite gotten there yet. And guess what? The texture of that film is different if you didn't get there. One of the little things that was good and was pulled off well was the trash workers' strike, so that there's just trash all over the city. That element, which is constantly put in our face but rarely referenced, that's the way you do those little things. What are some of the big things that were not quite fleshed out, that were half-baked in the middle of this cookie? The cookie of Joker? What about all those riots? Shouldn't we have seen a little bit more of that? Shouldn't we have understood a little bit more about how Arthur felt about those things? It's only about 3/4 of the way through that film that we understand they're really going on. That needed more time in your script. This is this man, Arthur Fleck, assuming the role of hero. The role of hero from the most archetypal villain in the DC universe. One of the most archetypal villains in American literature, in American letters. Quite possibly the greatest comic book villain of all time. I don't know anyone who... Look, you might say someone else is the greatest comic book villain of all time, and I'll let you make your argument, but it better be a damn good one. So in these moments where that character that everyone has in the back of their head... Now this is intratextual, because this is the Joker. This is intratextual, because this is the Joker. This is the same character across mediums. Because everyone has that character in their head as the archetypal villain, him seeing himself as the hero in these times, him being lauded, his actions being adopted, his face paint, his look being adopted, that's something we need to play with more. That is the irony of this character for this film. The irony of the character of the Joker in general, when you're speaking about the character, is his need for Batman. That's the core irony to the character. The core irony to the character of Arthur Fleck in this film is that though he is the bad guy, he is being lauded as the hero. That is necessary to examine and exploit. That's where the bulk of the second half of this film should have been concentrated, but it was not. It was half-baked. It could have been great. It could have been brilliant. It could have been masterful. It was not. It was just a detail. It was a distraction. Another thing? 3 late 20s white men being gunned down in a train station triggers all of that? I don't believe you. I don't believe it. Especially in the city which was depicted on screen throughout this movie. Those things just happen. Those things happen. They're swept under the rug. It is what it is. I live in Kansas City, and those things happen and are swept under the rug. It is a little bit unbelievable to me that those things themselves caused such an outrage. that is a little thing which should have been a much bigger deal. It was a medium detail in the movie that I'm not sure if it was one of the little details burnt to a crisp or if it was one of the big details that was never really fleshed out. And that is the fact that the Joker becomes the Joker in a bathroom. In a bathroom scene. He becomes the Joker. He also is forced to lose all of those things which he had so that scene where he becomes a Joker, I think that's one that we can all remember from the movie. Assuming that role, that identity, and letting that clown makeup mean something else. The other scene that happens in the bathroom is when he is forced to lose the Arthur Fleck which he had previously held on to so dearly. When he confronts Thomas Wayne. And this Thomas Wayne, not the nicest fella, not the greatest fella to Mr. Fleck. In Thomas's defense, this is a guy who lightly assaulted his child son. However, that scene as well, where Thomas Wayne decks him and says, "You're nothing to me. I'm not your father. You were adopted. Don't be silly." That happens in the restroom as well. I'm not sure if that's one of those little things which was burnt to a crisp, or if it's one of those meta-narratives that was not quite baked through. I want to know. I want to believe that it's maybe, because I can't decide which one of those things it is, maybe it's just right. But with the general level of competence in this film, I can't grant it that. Look, there was a lot of ambition here. I can recognize that. Anyone that saw that film can recognize that. I just don't think it was pulled off very well. Moving on. Another thing that I am not quite sure I understood. I am not quite sure I recognized. I am not quite sure with what to do. One would be remiss, both because of the era of this film. Semi-ambiguous, but you get the dress, right? You understand when they are because of the way everyone looks. You know approximately an 8-ish year window that this happens. Late 70s, early 80s. Now, pardon me if I am mistaken and there is an exact year given to us. In fact, I think there was a lot of newspapers that appeared in this film. It's almost impossible that an exact date is not given to us. However, because of both the era of this film, as well as due to the cringe factor of the Joker's comedy itself, one would be remiss not to mention Andy Kaufman. And I'm not sure what to do with that. Now, there are obvious references being provoked by this film. Taxi Driver, for one. And I think those things have probably been expounded upon ad nauseum in commentary about this film. But I don't know what to do with the Andy Kaufman sort of... It's not a reference, and it's not a direct correlation, but that sort of cringe comedy, when paired with the era, paired indeed with some of the things that Joker himself wore, I think you almost have to envision Andy Kaufman somewhere along the line. I think you almost have to... It seems that you're being... that it's just being drawn out of you like by a salve placed over your memory to sort of coax Andy Kaufman into things. And the only thing I can really sort of maybe understand with this is the fact that whenever you think of Andy Kaufman, you have to think of his untimely demise. As unfortunate as it is, that is sort of the man, and it's hard to say it this way. That's sort of the cherry on top of the Andy Kaufman circumstance, because due to the effectiveness of Andy Kaufman himself, no one believed it. Everyone thought it was a joke. Everyone thought they were being led on. Everyone thought that he was getting one over on them. Maybe that mystery, that sort of teasing of the imagination towards a darker type of humor. Is Andy Kaufman still alive? He's just leading us to believe that he's dead. That teasing of a darker sense of humor, if that is supposed to be wandering in the back of your head like a ghost at some level. That's the only thing I can think to do with that. So the much of the commentary here is about, in this movie, I'm moving on from that point. That was a terrible transition. Much of the commentary in this movie is about sort of class warfare and capitalism, and at some point you've got to raise the floor if the ceiling keeps getting higher. That seems to be the economic sort of argument there, especially as it leads into the second main thrust, it occurs to me, of this film, which is about mental health. And it's an interesting argument, I think, put forward by this movie about mental health. Because the Joker's mother, Penny, I don't know if you caught that, her name's Penny, adopted him. Which means that though Penny, I don't know if you caught her name, her name's Penny. Penny is crazy as all hell. Though Penny is crazy as all hell, this is not her biological son. The Arthur Fleck, Joker, as it would be, is not her biological son. So those conditions through which and from which she suffered, psychologically, delusions of grandeur, delusions of persecution, these things are often biologically inheritable. These things, when they are a mental condition, many times they just follow down the family tree. They follow out into those branches. Arthur suffers from delusions of grandeur, suffers from delusions of persecution, is someone just like his mother that makes up stories, the Zazie Beetz, the Thomas Wayne, makes up intimacy when there is none other to be had. These things are often inheritable traits when they are something from which someone suffers. That argument, however, is dispelled in this movie by the fact that he is adopted, stating, for the movie, most of those things which toy with us in these ways must be environmental. This is a statement for nurture over nature. It is very tempting throughout this movie to watch Penny and understand that the reason Arthur is the way he is because Penny is the way she is. But that the way she is part, and that the way he is part, is due to conditioning. This is interesting. Now, a sort of... I'm not sure what to do with it, but it is, I think, a nice argument to be put forward by the film, because it is something that if you're willing to just accept the film as a piece of entertainment, might not grate on you, might not work on you, might not even open up any of those doors. But the minute you sit back and you decide, well, I'm going to take this a little bit more seriously than that, I want to think about some of those ideas presented within, that's one of those things which is inescapable. That this is an argument for nurture, not nature. And indeed, the entire city is set up in that fashion. All of those things which are going on in the outside world reflect those things going on in the inside world of Arthur Fleck. These people of Gotham are not necessarily bad people. They're in bad circumstance. And that's what makes Gotham City, Gotham City. Along those lines, there is one small thing that I have to comment on because it was just so ridiculous in the movie, and it is something that should have been edited out if there was any proofreading to this film at all whatsoever. It sticks out like a sore thumb. The scene with, I believe the appropriate title would be Orderly. The scene with the Orderly, where Arthur is searching out his mother's records. And the Orderly says, man, these things are stacked chronologically. So the older they are, the further down you gotta go. And the ones you're looking for are 30 years old, so boy, I sure had some trekking to do. Okay, I can buy that. This was a pain in the ass for the guy to go get. Fine. Happy, happy, joy, joy. And then he pulls Penny's file out of the box and reads it. As disappointing to Arthur as it is, as awkward as that exchange is for poor Arthur. He is then told, well, I'm really not authorized to give these out to you. Then why did you go 3 stories down, pick up a 30-pound box, and carry that box all the way up to the top without ever even checking if the file is actually in there, for Arthur to then steal from you and run off? Unless it's imaginary, which we're sort of invited, at least, to play with any and all scenes in this movie as if they might be imaginary. We're tempted by the director, but I think it's because it's a lazy way out. I think it's because you are able to induce any theory ad nauseum for this film if you're willing to accept, oh, the 3rd scene and the 7th scene, those are figments of Arthur's imagination. That end scene, figments of Arthur's imagination. That's lazy. Now, that is not to say that some ambiguity in the script is lazy, but when the whole thing is possibly imaginary, that's lazy. That's an old trick. Speaking of the end of the movie, where he goes on the talk show, and again, spoilers, if you've gotten this far. I don't know how you got this far without having seen the movie, but he goes ahead and decides to put one in old Robert De Niro. That scene definitely should have contained a suicide. This character of Joker. Now, I've been saying it wrong almost this entire time. The scene contains Joker, not the Joker. The scene contains Joker. At that point, that man commits suicide on live TV. The term Joker becomes multiple. He has influenced and inspired an entire generation of dirtbag. And remember, the title is Joker, not the Joker. Not the, just Joker. I think, for me, despite the fact that we are, again, coaxed along to believing that that is what is going to happen in that end scene, it would have made an impact. Suicides on screen always make an impact, and seemingly more so than any type of murder. I mean, you've got the torture porn that comes out every year and is running into the law of diminishing returns. Right? But anytime there's someone taking their own life, am I the only one that flinches, that clinches up? Maybe that says more about me than anyone else if it is just me. But it seems that those things make a special impact on the viewer. And that's the viewer of a movie. Imagine seeing that take place live action on the TV, which in those days was where every set of eyes in the country which was awake would have been. Right? So for me, that would have been a much larger impact of a scene. But also, I think what it does is it opens up the audience to the idea, if the Joker at that point becomes multiple, which he is in the comics, if the Joker at that point becomes multiple, it also opens up the audience to the idea of something such as Batman Incorporated. This movie, like it or not, make arguments for or against it if you will, if you must, this movie has the added responsibility to broaden the minds of the audience because it is not contributing directly to a movie universe tapestry. It just does. Logan, in its way, owed it to comic book movies to broaden the audience's minds towards what a comic book movie might be, because it did not directly contribute to the tapestry of the X-Men universe. And guess what? It sure did. Logan was mind-blowing. Logan was great. That was a great film. Deadpool was not at the time contributing to any larger tapestry. So it had the responsibility of broadening the audience's mind to what a comic book movie might be, so that other comic book movies could enjoy greater success and might see a broadened audience to that which they were previously enjoying, as large as that audience may have been, because the difference between Deadpool / Logan / could have been Joker and other things in those movies contributed to superhero movie being more than a genre. Possibly, one could even call it a platform. The superhero movie as a platform instead of as a genre. Superhero movies are a platform that contains subgenre. So, we're going to finish this up with a rating and a recommendation based on the film. Rating, this is going to make no one happy because it is a lukewarm rating. So if you hated the film, you're going to think I'm being too generous. If you loved the film, you're going to think I'm just being a prick. I would give this 77 bathtub scenes out of 100. I think that this movie had a lot of potential. Think of a high C grade paper. 77%. There were some nice things going on in that paper, but the conclusions did not always follow the premises. And that was very much how this movie felt. What would I recommend? If you enjoyed watching Joker, I'd recommend The Wrestler. This is the story of a loner who has very different conceptions of himself versus the conceptions that other people have of him. This is the story of a loner who is finally feeling alone. This is the story of a loner who is deciding on what end it might be for him. Because make no mistake, that scene on set for Joker was a final decision. You're not running out of there. Now, he did a little bit get out. He did a little bit escape. He did a little bit influence things after that. But you're making that decision knowing it's probably going to be your last decision. It is a bit of, maybe not suicide by cop, but something akin to that. So, that is what I have as a review for Joker. If you enjoyed this, go ahead and hit that like button because it really helps me out here on the channel. Share this if you are feeling especially I'm looking for the right word here. Charitable? Yeah. If you're feeling especially charitable, share this because it really helps me out as well. And if you are looking forward to other videos such as this, hitting that subscribe button will make sure that I pop up in your recommended feed moving forward. And I hope to see you next time.